Welcome everyone. Good afternoon. We are delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Green Future of the EU, which is organized by Euractiv.pl as part of the program Young Leaders for the Future of Europe. We will discuss the many issues that the EU is now facing in regards to green transition and energy security. We are live on Zoom and on Facebook, and we will be here for about an hour. Also, a very warm welcome to our guests, Mr. Bas Eickhout, the Dutch politician and chemist, member of the European Parliament since 2009, Vice President of the Greens European Free Alliance in the European Parliament, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, and also with us, Mr. Jakub Wiech, Polish economic journalist, lawyer, and the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Energetyka24 website, author of the books Energiewende, A New German Empire, and Global Warming, A Manual for the Green Right. Now, before we begin, I would like to give the floor to our Editor-in-Chief, Mrs. Karolina Zbytniewska.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome to our Zoom and Facebook audience on this fourth webinar organized as part of the Young Leaders for the Future of Europe project that is coordinated by us, by Euractiv Poland and by European Parliament. I would like also to very warmly welcome our amazing panelists, the already mentioned, and here with us Bas Eickhout and Jakub Wiech. Good afternoon. Who will guarantee an interesting and certainly a very insightful debate. When creating this project, Young Leaders for the Future of Europe, we were guided by the idea of providing young, engaged and mission-driven people with a space to discuss current and future challenges that Europe will face with experts and European decision makers. And today's webinar will address the green future of Europe and challenges that face meeting this grand vision. Energy and environment are key insofar as our tomorrow's geopolitics and partly also overall humanity will be somehow more or less associated to the questions and answers that we will discuss today. Therefore, without further extension, I give the floor back to Martyna Hanak, and I wish you a successful and interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So without further ado, let's commence the first part of our webinar, which will deal with energy. Anna, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you so much for the voice. So we hear a lot about the importance of an energy sector to become more renewable, more green. And renewable energy sources are believed to be a way to go. However, in 2021, we observed an unexpected winter storms in Texas, which caused a major energy crisis, and a few hundred people were killed because those energy plants weren't able to provide necessary energy. So I would like to ask, what is your opinion on the reliability of renewable energy sources, especially considering those blackouts? So maybe Mr. Eickhout would like to start.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Well, here in Zoom, calling from Brussels, but it's great to have the technology enabling us to have these discussions together. And you're absolutely right, of course, that if you look at our energy system, it is for now a very centralized energy system. So you have a central energy generation and then decentralized where the consumers are, of course. So that's a system that has been built over a very long period of time, right? So that's a kind of a choice that we made from the past. That is not a nature law that our energy system should look like that. But if you want to transition it, you have to do that in a proper way. And clearly, I would say an advantage of renewable energy is that its production and generation also at a decentralized way. So it is, by the way, also can be very centralized. If you think of offshore wind parks, you can also think of solar parks. So there are a lot of renewable options that are also very centralized, but in a large extent, it's also decentralized. So, for example, in Germany, quite a lot of energy is now in the hands of groups of citizens instead of companies. So also from a democratic point of view, there is an interesting development in energy. And that's why there is also, of course, quite some private sector lobbying against it, because their power grip on energy, where a few players can determine the energy price, is also at stake here. So when you hear a lot of criticism, sometimes you also have to check out who is the criticizer and what is the interest in the energy system that we have today. Part of that. So this means, yes, you have more decentralized energy supply. So what will become very crucial is investments in infrastructure, in interconnectivity, and of course also in storage. There are storage facilities possible. You can think of the longer term future where even our transport sector becomes part of the storage, because a lot of cars in the world are standing still. If they are if they have been linked to the grid, and you have a two-way battery, then you can not only charge your car, it can also deliver. So it becomes part of your entire energy grid, including storage. So there are a lot of solutions out there, but it means a massive investment program, which we will need in our energy system anyhow, no matter which future you want. Energy investments are crucial for entire Europe, and we need to think of a European grid where European solutions are being found. If you do that, then does not have to be an additional uncertainty to your system, but you have to do that in a proper way. And that transition is, of course, going to be the biggest challenge. So I'm not the one saying that it will all go wrong or whatsoever, or that there are no problems. It is a transition that is demanding. But as I said, any energy choice we're going to make will be demanding. And I think it's about time that we do have a proper European discussion on it. What will be our direction? And then also fed into that a proper European investment program that's linked to that. We have to do this together. And I think the war in Ukraine shows us how vulnerable we are if we do not do it together.
Thank you so much for your answer. And now, Mr. Wiech, would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the possibility to be here and to share my opinions with you. Well, first of all, while referring to the Texas example, it's quite a specific thing what happened, because first of all, it was not the renewables energy sources that failed on that day in Texas. It was mostly gas-fired and coal-fired energy power plants. Out of 30 gigawatts that were thrown out of the Texas energy grid, approximately 26 gigawatts were installed in the fossil fuel capacities. Only 4 gigawatts were installed in wind power. So that was not the renewable sector who was the one to blame for the critical conditions that appeared on that day in Texas and led to many tragedies of the Texas citizens. What's more, Texas is quite unique in the energy map of United States, because this is the one state that is not connected to other by interconnectors. So in the time of need, Texas energy grid operator ERCOT could not ask for capacity to be put in the Texas grid. So that's why the isolation of Texas became a trap for themselves. The lack of proper energy grids that were linking Texas to other states and the problems with their own capacities were the mostly fossil fuels capacities were the exact reason of the failure that happened in the February 2021. And what we can learn from the Texas example is that, the mechanism that we are building, the machines that we are building, because the energy system is a machine itself, are very vulnerable to circumstances that extend our normal situations. The attack of the winter weather back then in February was far more exceeding the weather forecasts, and of course it was exceeding the possibilities of the Texas grid and possible functioning of this mechanism. So it failed, and in the circumstances of ongoing climate change, we'll have to face with more and more examples like this, because climate change will also not only increase the mean global temperature, but also will result in increasing the frequency of events like this, of bad weather, of storms, hurricanes, and so on. So if we want to protect ourselves from the situations like happened in Texas, because the attack of winter in Texas was directly connected to the collapse of the polar vortex, which is the result of ongoing climate change, we have to stop the climate change. And we have to use for example, it's only the part of the answer, but very important part. We have to use technologies that will generate power without any emissions. It is possible right now for us to help ourselves in our development with this kind of technologies. We have nuclear, we have renewables, and we have energy efficiency mechanism. And these factors combined will lead us to a new model of energy system that will not have an important impact on the climate. So just to recap, if we want to protect ourselves from things like happened in Texas, we have to stop climate change right now.
Thank you so much, and I would like to give the voice to other hosts.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So my question is actually related to energy sectors of developing countries, such as Poland, which are based on coal. Because green transformation may be quite challenging for such countries. It's very hard to switch their whole energy sector to renewables, for example. And my question is, may nuclear power be a considerable option for such countries, such as Poland? And this question goes first to Mr. Eickhout.
Yeah, thanks a lot. First of all, I would not call Poland a developing country. That for me is totally not. Poland is part of the European family and well developed. And so I would not call Poland a developing country. Secondly, yes, there is still a big coal reliance, but I do not necessarily see why that immediately has. The question is how to get away from coal. That is the question. And this doesn't mean that therefore you suddenly have another answer to other countries who are also still dependent of fossils. I mean, Italy is to a large extent dependent of gas. So also that needs to change. So we all have these challenges. And for example, this narrative, like we do first coal, then gas, and then maybe something else, I think that narrative really should be scrutinized better, this kind of transition narrative. Is that now really the point that we will need? So I think we much more need a European discussion on what kind of energy future do we want as Europeans, and then see what your starting position is, and whether it's coal, gas, or whatever doesn't want. We need to get away from our fossil dependency, not only for climate reasons, also for financial reasons. The current energy prices are driven by fossils. It's fossilflation, not inflation, but fossilflation. So I think that is also very important. And thirdly, for geopolitical reasons, you should not have your fossil dependency. So then the question is, would there be a place for nuclear? I know that's a very favorite discussion. And my question back is, okay, is that really so necessary? Is that really so necessary to have that in the mix? The choices are there. Every country can decide on it. There are no forbidden issues on that. So Poland could choose for it, but it's an expensive one. There is no nuclear plant in the world built without a massive subsidy. And at the end, when the decommissioning needs to happen, which still needs to happen at one day, it has never happened without massive subsidies there. You see that those nuclears that are being built in Europe right now, and at this moment we see some building in well, in the European Union, in France and Finland, and there's a UK also, all the projects are postponed, delayed, and much more expensive than initially thought. And initially, it was already a big government money that had to be spent on it. Hungary decided for nuclear, but only did that with a contract with Russia. We do not know what's in the contract. The parliament only agreed with it without looking into it. So Hungary has a contract with Russia on nuclear, with PAX. We do not know what's in it. We do know that there was also money involved and a lending. And the only thing we see is how Orban is operating when we're discussing boycotts at the moment. So he's a Trojan horse for Putin. And partly, it's certainly also the nuclear dependency that he is building into the system. So all that cannot be disregarded. So nuclear has a lot of disadvantages. I'm not denying that there is also the CO2 footprint. But for me, if I look at the possibilities that we are having, then it's much more the choice going for renewables and nuclear. Nuclear could be a kind of a backstop, but again, that we can also have if we have a much more European grid system. Anyhow, we need a massive investment, and I would not choose for nuclear for all the reasons that I gave. But again, if Poland wants to do it, they can do it, but then prepare to pay a lot of money for it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eickhout. I know that Mr. Wiech is a huge advocate for nuclear power, so this question also goes to Mr. Wiech.
Right. Well, first, let me refer to the Poland example, the Polish example, because again, Poland is quite unique in its energy system, and we are a country that relies on coal to the greatest extent in the European Union, and that's a huge problem. But it stems from the fact that Poland did not have energy transition in the last 30 years, and this is the time that we actually let pass and did nothing with our own energy grid. We should have energy transition, but we had energy conservation because the share of coal in our energy mix actually stayed at the same level that it was like 20 years ago. So Polish energy transition for now is a failure. It's a massive failure, and we see it in our energy bills because they're increasing due to the fact that we pay more and more to the emission trading, and that results, of course, in the consumers' energy prices. But going back to nuclear, well, in my opinion, and this is actually a statement that can be referred not only to Poland but to European Union or to the world overall. Well, the climate crisis that is going on pushes us to the point when we see that we cannot rely on just one single technology to cope with the climate change. It's not a beauty contest anymore. We have to take whatever is on the table and engage it in a way to lower our emissions, to make our power generation system less emissioning, and of course to still grant to our citizens the stability and affordability of energy, because this is very important right now. And we also what happened in France during the yellow vests protests that were rising on the issue of rising energy prices, rising fuel prices. So while combining the measures undertaken to grant ourselves a proper energy transition towards climate neutrality, we have also to look at the economic costs of that transition and the possible citizens' impact in terms of their individual budget. And we do have a lot of examples of nuclear being properly engaged in this kind of transition. And of course, nuclear is a huge investment. You do not deny that, and it requires state help. Especially in the in Europe, but this stems from the fact that nuclear industry was not coping very well in the last several decades, mostly because of the fear that raised after Chernobyl or Fukushima, and the decline in investments in that particular branch. But however, what we see now in the Central Europe is some kind of an nuclear energy renaissance, because we have countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, that are preparing or already investing in new nuclear capacities. So that's a huge park of new energy capacities that will grow soon. And if we look what is happening in China, in India, in the developing nations that are trying to grant themselves with proper energy, we all see that the nuclear is playing a significant role in their energy transition. And what's more, if we look on the examples like France or Ontario in Canada, we see that nuclear is quite well combined with renewables in order to help us in a proper and stable and long-term decarbonization of our energy system. So I think that nuclear is unavoidable, and in the terms of the cost, of course, it's quite easy to discuss the cost of energy transition on the example of renewables right now, when we do have a European market that was prepared to develop renewables very quickly, and they can use a lot of instruments, of mechanisms in order to help the development of renewables. However, nuclear is far away from that and cannot use the same amounts of money just to help it being developed. But we had a period in our European history in 1970s when we used nuclear to lower our reliance on fossil fuels. It happened in France in 1974 when the Prime Minister Mesmer started the nuclear program that resulted in building 56 nuclear reactors in just several years. So I think that we are now in a position that requires us to engage this kind of unique and extraordinary measures just to keep our energy grids available to the citizens to have energy, and of course to decarbonize our energy system in order to stop climate change. And nuclear plays a significant role here. It's not the one and only solution to the climate change, but it has to be engaged in order to cope with this properly.
Okay, thank you so much. My next question is, maybe Mr. Eickhout, do you want to add anything to Mr. Wiech's speech?
No, we disagree on this one. So that is quite clear. And also, for example, one of the few countries that not meet its 2020 renewable target was France. So when you say it goes so well together, it is interesting. It has an impact, of course, on your development of renewables. We see that in France. So it's not kind of the only marriage that is possible is nuclear and renewables. So, and talking about the renaissance, it's a renaissance on paper. Yes, there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of plans, but the actual plans where things are being built, where the spade is in the ground, it's not so many. And as I said, the ones where we do see actual development, that's France and Finland, it is being delayed and even more expensive. And I think if you look, and this is also important, right? Look at the price development of energy resources. The normal development is that an energy resource gets cheaper when it's more applied and more used. So your price per kilowatt hour goes down. That's what you see substantially for renewables, and any projection of the International Energy Agency was always outdated because renewables were outperforming and the price development was going much faster. Nuclear is one of the few where the price goes up. It's because of safety concerns, I know, but the fact is it's per kilowatt hour getting more expensive over time, even when it's more applied. So that also should be a concern for anyone who wants to go there, because economically speaking, kind of the competition is getting more and more into the favor of renewables. I think the big issue with renewables, but that we discussed already, is in order to have a stable system there, you need to do much more investments in the entire grid, the interconnectivity and the storage. It can be done, but that is also a massive investment. I'm fully aware of that. But for me, it's not like you can't do without. You can. It's a political decision. I think it's a political wise decision, but it's all fair and ground to say, well, I think it should be part of the mix. But then you have to be fair also about all these elements that are part of the mix.
Can I have just two single remarks on that? Just short remarks. I would like to ask you, Mr. Eickhout, when will Germany achieve the level of emission intensity from an energy sector as France has right now? This is my first question. And the second remark is, sure, we can say that glider is cheaper than the jet airliner. It's true, of course. But if you want to fly over the Atlantic Ocean, I advise to take a jet airliner because it makes more likely your journey will go well, and you will land successfully. So in that, this is of course a metaphor, and this leads us to the conclusion that sometimes we have to invest more just to make sure that we will achieve our goals. And nuclear is helping achieving our goals very well. And France as an example of energy system, or the Ontario one, or even Belgium that decided to stay with nuclear for a longer time to make sure that the power will stay on. There are examples of the inevitable need of nuclear here installed in our energy systems.
Okay, thank you so much.
I was asked a question, so I have to reply there. I was asked a question on when do I think that Germany is reaching the same carbon intensity level as France. The aim of German and the new German government is by 2035 they have a 100% renewable system. Well, then you're better than France in 2035. That's in 10 years' time. Germany, if the plans work out, will be better than France, because I don't see France being so explicit on their development on energy. So I think we can have a lot of criticism on all kind of decisions that have been made in the past. And I think Germany made some decisions in the past which was much too coal reliant and then switching to gas. We see the problems with that, but we also see that they now have plans into the pipeline to change that. And they want to go to 100% renewables. And then you know very well they will have a zero carbon intensity by 2035, which is better than the French one. And just on that example, it's nice. It's a nice comparison, but it feeds a bit that idea that nuclear is kind of, the newest innovative technology and the rest is a bit backwards. I know
it is actually.
Well, it's not. Because nuclear is a very, very complicated way of doing energy. In the end, it's just a water boiler that is super complicated. That is what nuclear is, and with a lot of issues around it. So it's not that, and so innovative it isn't. In April, half of the nuclear plants in France had to close down for maintenance because they were having so many problems, and they still have. In France, there are huge problems with the nuclear plants right now. So it's not so stable and secure either, even without any of the other problems. So let's not pretend you have the modern technology here and all the rest is a bit more like an old bike or whatsoever. I think it's much more nuanced. It's a political decision. Mr. Wiech, you're free to have but I am free to disagree.
Gentlemen, I need to interrupt this heated discussion. It's very interesting, but we have some more topics and the time is running. So I would like to ask you to describe in maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, one thing, because considering Russian aggression on Ukraine, I think it is clear that the European Union needs to become independent of Russian gas and oil. And my question is, what alternative sources would you suggest for European countries to, let's say, achieve, to use instead of gas and oil that comes from Russia? This question goes to Mr. Wiech.
Well, that's a hard one right now when we are discussing the possibilities to grant ourselves with oil supplies without Russian oil. But well, let me start with a general remark that what we have seen on 24th of February this year was a huge collapse of long-term energy liberalism policy that thought of Russia as a long-lasting fuel stations for Europe and ignored the very disturbing signals of Russian aggression that were coming to Europe since 2014 at last. And that actually was a failure of many states in Europe that decided to be dependent structurally on Russian fossil fuels, and this dependence also results in our current legislation and sanctions that we can engage to answer for the Russian aggression, and that's lead us to well the discussion on a new shape of European energy transition and the climate policy. And in my opinion, if you want to on the one hand achieve the goal of climate neutrality in 2050, and on the other hand to be energy secure in many ways, in many perspectives, we have to armor our energy transition in more into three significant attributes, which are the decarbonization, which is actually engaged quite well right now, diversification, which means that we have to cut our energy ties with Russia, and diversification. And the other one is actually the essence of your question, because we know that we will use fossil fuels for some time now. We just cannot skip very shortly to low emission economy. It's just not possible. So we have to use fossil fuels for several years in the future. And if you ask me what to from where to take the fossil fuels that we need, well, we have some possibilities. However, the nowadays energy market is very much disrupted because of the ongoing war and uncertainties related to this war, and of course because of pandemics that still affects on, for example, the price of shipping and the price of the overall price of energy on the European market. So it's very hard right now to get the access of affordable energy in Europe. But well, let's say that we are planning the next several years. So I think that we should open for the resources coming in form of LNG, liquefied natural gas, to our economy. And the steps that Germany are making, like building the infrastructure that is needed to take the shipments of LNG, are very important, because they are the first steps towards limiting the German dependence on Russia, and that's an important shift in the German energy transition, I think. But of course, we have also to engage more renewable power in Europe in general, especially in countries like Poland. We have to also rely more on nuclear and on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is somehow forgotten, especially in Central Europe, but it has to be engaged as much as the new capacities to protect our energy systems.
Okay, so the same question goes to Mr. Eickhout. What do you think?
Well, I think Jakub has given an answer where I think 95% we agree. And I also just want to stress this liberalized energy model that Europe has been pushing for was very much driven by a couple of Western European countries, including mine, the Netherlands. And I can only say that we as Greens have been fighting against that for a while as well. Also in Germany, the German Greens have been from the start been against Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream projects. I mean, it was driven by the center parties who indeed had a very naive idea on that the world would be further liberalized, that the market is the best way to give us cheap energy, because let's be fair, we always talked about it needs to be cheap, affordable, green and secure. But basically, we focus only on cheap. But we have been penny wise, pound foolish. And we are paying the price for that now. And you can wonder, the cheap energy price that we paid for a while, the price we're paying now, is it worth it? And I think that is a fundamental discussion that we need to have. There is just, in the world, energy is a geopolitical tool, and people use it against us, and we should not be naive around it. And I think we very much agree on that. And I just want to stress that has been a political discussion. Unfortunately, the majorities were not in the same direction, which is now partly shifting. And I think that is good. The last point that I want to make, in order not to go as long, it's indeed the point on energy efficiency. It is underestimated not only in Central Europe, it's underestimated everywhere. And this is really stupid. It is the cheapest form of energy, is the energy form you do not use and you do not have to replace and you do not have to import. And every time people say, but that's tiny, that's a little bit, the feeling is that's not the big thing. Politicians have the feeling they need to build something big where they can cut the ribbon and look tough. But sometimes it's these small measures that can be much more effective. And I just give you one number. A couple of years ago, we were all having this discussion. Why is Europe regulating our vacuum cleaner? Right? And people were making fun. Oh, Europe regulating the vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner, yes. So the point is, what we did was regulating that the vacuum cleaner should become more energy efficient. The consumer hasn't noticed that. They just bought this a vacuum cleaner, comparable price, but much more energy efficient. So your energy bill was going down. We were using less energy and it was better for the environment. And just to give you the number, only regulating the vacuum cleaners has saved energy in Europe to the amount comparable to 4 coal-fired power plants. So 4 coal-fired power plants we have saved only by regulating vacuum cleaners. This shows that is a massive underestimated potential. And there I very much agree with Jakub that this is going to be one of those big fights, but it's going to be in every country, not only in Central European countries, also in the Netherlands, Germany, France. We have to work on that.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I'm really glad that we found agreement in this case because Ukrainian people really need us right now. I'm giving the floor to the next person.
Well, we are very happy to see that the topic of energy generated a bit of a heated discussion here. It's certainly contentious. And I'm sure that you gentlemen have many, many more things to say about that. Now we're a bit on the clock here, but we have a bit of time left. So we're going to move on to our next part, which will touch upon the green future of Europe, to put it simply. Anne-Marie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martina. Nice to meet you, gentlemen. I would like to address my first question to Mr. Jakub Wiech. And you spoke about smog on the numerous channels, from Together Air conference, an interview in smogowicze.pl. So we had a knowledge about smog since '79, and that's when the first convention on air protection took place. Why it took so long for decision makers to take action? And also, is this action enough?
Well, actually, the answer is quite simple. It took so long because only just several years ago, people started to have smartphones in their hands and installed the air quality apps that show them what are the air conditions in their neighborhood. So they started to notice that something is wrong. When they saw the red flags on the apps, and that they were showing them that the level of, for example, PM 2.5 is too high and it is a danger to their health, well, they started to push the decision makers to do something with it. And this is actually the example of movement. I'm referring, of course, to the Polish example because this is the one I know, and we have a huge problem with air quality because of the fact that 90% of coal that is used in the European Union to heat houses or households are being burned in Poland. And this creates a problem with air quality to a great extent. And the people started to notice the problem only when they had access to information. And this stresses the fact that information and the proper flow of information is vital in coping with problems like air quality problems or with climate change problems and so on. And this in Poland here we have the most well-financed air quality solving program in Europe right now. We invest billions of zlotys to help people in smaller cities in Poland to get out of the air quality problem and to, for example, change their heating source from coal to gas or the heat pump or so on. But of course, it will take several years more to solve it in the visible extent. But right now, we see on the regional level that some problems with air quality are limited. For example, in Krakow, which was like a smog capital of Poland for several years. So yes, what we can say about the air quality problem in Poland is that the proper flow of information and the attention of society can do miracles in the terms of decision making, and this is something that we can use in solving the climate change issue.
Thank you very much. And how are the Netherlands tackling the problem?
Yeah, well, I think, let's be fair, air quality has been improving over the years. So it's not that we have been standing still and now it's only being regulated. Over the course of years, we have seen improvements because we have demanded our industry to clean up to a certain level. Also, of course, the development in some of our transport modes. There are developments that at least the air quality issue is better than when we're looking at, say, the beginning of the previous century, where you can imagine the pictures of London where everything was black, basically. That's not what we're having anymore. Also not in Poland, although I do indeed agree. I've been to a couple of Polish cities, and it was really, you felt it was worse than what we have now in the Netherlands. So it is a big problem. I think on your question, how come that it's indeed a lot of the points that Jakub said, but I think also very important, and let's be honest about that, it's economic interest, economic short-term interest. Because, and this is of course a fundamental problem in our economic system again, what we do is, of course, companies, they make profit, we work for them, so they deliver jobs, etc. So they are seen as part of our economy, but their negative impact, we have not really incorporated that, and we have basically the price of all that, the cost of all that, we have channeled that through the entire society. For example, our healthcare system is paying the price for it. If you look at premature death, but more important, all the illnesses because of lack of air quality, that's a huge cost for the entire society, but that's spread all over the society and not so clear. If you want to do some policy on it, a company will say, then I will have to pay for it. But the point is, yes, one company might have to pay for a measure, but the entire society will profit from it. But that's not how our political decision making is being made. We hear the one company, we don't hear the society. And this is a fundamental problem also in our political system, where the one economic interest has a stronger voice and is more being listened to than the general societal advantages that we get from clean air. And I think this is also a fundamental problem with it. And I'm happy that thanks to information and democratization of information, we now can have more vocal society on that. And it's a way to have a bit of a fairer distribution of power basically towards politicians, but it's still very, very unevenly balanced. And that's also one of the reasons why we're still not doing enough in cleaning up our air.
Thank you so much. I 100% agree with that. We are on a bit tight schedule here. So my next question the answer should be limited to probably a minute or two. Well, Mr. Eickhout, in March, you were mentioning regarding a climate neutral economy in 2050, that a real green industry relies on recycled materials. And it also means improved waste management, limiting the use of landfilling, and changing our behavior, the consumer's behavior. And nevertheless, we are falling behind such countries as Japan or Korea here in EU. So why is it happening?
Well, I think indeed, I mean, and this is very important, climate neutrality will not be met if we also do not combine it with a fully circular economy. Those go hand in hand. We have to talk about our entire resource efficiency, certainly as Europe. I think what is driving us, certainly Japan. I know Japan a bit better than South Korea, but Japan, being an island and being politically also quite isolated, have really from the start a very clear policy driven by efficiency, because an island is of course very import dependent and vulnerable for that. Japan does not have so many own resources, so the way they can be then, beating that is by being super efficient. So efficiency, recycling has been a core of the Japanese economy for a long while. And I think it's comparable in South Korea, but as I said, Japan is a bit, I know better at least. Europe basically has the same vulnerability. We are very much resource dependent for imports. We do not, we can look at more of our resources, but in the end, we are limited, and we are a highly densely populated area, but very rich. And we have been thinking for a very long while that we can solve a lot through trading and all that. So that's a bit back to also our mistake with Russia, where we were thinking that we can solve it by trading with neighbors, and then we're all fine. There we see that's the vulnerable system, and I think that change of mind is starting to change now, but that really needs to improve. And I think we can learn a lot from other countries there.
Thank you. Mr. Jakub, anything to add?
Yes, just a short remark. Sorry for not having me on the video. I had some problems with lighting in the room that I'm staying in, but just a short remark that, circular economy and using the resources that we already have is something like energy efficiency. It's vital, it's crucial, but it's somehow forgotten or skipped in the many countries that are going with the energy transition. And without it, it will be very hard for ourselves to achieve the goals that we have set up for our economy.
Thank you so much. Martyna?
Okay, moving on to water. According to a recent report, 1/3 of Europe is already experiencing water scarcity, especially in the south. Long droughts were exacerbated by climate change, and they particularly affect farmers, for example. So my question is the current EU water framework capable of adequately addressing the issue, or do we need a new comprehensive strategy? And we may begin with Mr. Wiech.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not an expert on hydrology or the water problems of Europe, but I will limit my answer just to the Polish example. And in Poland, we have, we engaged only 2 years ago a program that is addressed to the farmers and that promotes the water savings by, for example, building water tanks that when the rainfall can be stored and then used in order to water the crops and so on. So again, it's a field that has been forgotten somehow, that we can use the water that we have already by, for example, rainfall in our economy. We don't have to use the underground sources or the watering systems provided by the government or the authorities. So this is the problem that can be solved by just using the resources that we already have in a smarter manner, in a smarter terms.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eickhout, do you have something to add?
Yeah, maybe then a bit more from the European perspective indeed. So the Water Framework Directive, it's mainly talking about water quality, which is also important, of course. It's regulating also that the drinking water will have requirements, just also like surface water, where we would like to swim in basically and use for all kind of purposes. So that is an important one, and a lot of countries are not on track, by the way, for that. So there is an implementation problem. But the Water Framework Directive is not so strong on water scarcity and water availability, water quantity. And I think this indeed needs to be improved because, and here I again agree very much with Jakub, the challenges are underestimated. Also, looking at the climate impact, it's not only our farming system that needs to be much more water resilient, but also our industry is to a large extent dependent of water, and quite often water cooling, right? That's why all the factories are built close to rivers. But we see now more and more often that in the summer, these rivers don't provide enough water anymore because of climate change. So we have seen already that some industries had to lower their activity because there was not enough cooling water in the rivers. This is a fundamental problem that is underestimated. And there are even some factories having very fundamental discussions of moving away from inland sites to more sites at the coast. So this is also having tremendous impact, and we are underestimating it. Our agriculture system, our industrial system, and of course also how we live in the cities, because we need to work on a water system there, because now we have built a system where we, the philosophy is try to get rid of the water as soon as possible. So when it's falling, how can we channel it away? But that's a problem, because we will have to maintain it more. So we have to use the resilience of our nature to maintain and contain water, so that when it's falling, we can use it longer. And then when it's scarcity, we can have some of those reservoirs. So we have to work with nature instead of what we are doing right now quite often, thinking we can work despite nature. And if we're not changing that philosophy, and if Europe is not changing that philosophy, we will have huge problems. There were a lot of floodings in the UK a couple of years ago, and they all looked at the Netherlands. Why are you not having this problem? Well, there's a lot of problems with the Netherlands, but one thing we learned, and that is we have to live with the waters, because we are a river delta. That's nothing more. Netherlands is nothing more than a river delta. All the big rivers of the northwest come there in the Netherlands. So we are basically in a kind of swamp that we try to manage. And we have learned that to really have to work with the water and give room for the rivers. And that is an entire project. Whereas in the UK, they built canals, which of course, if then suddenly there are flooding, an entire city is being drowned. So there are huge issues that are challenging. What we will see is more water shortage, or sometimes more water flooding, and sometimes in the same areas, but on different times. So our approach to water needs a fundamental shift, and the current framework is not addressing that at all.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive answer. Now we're almost running out of time, but not quite. We have one question from a member of our audience, which I think is worth addressing briefly. So the question is, according to information from the Institute of Environmental Protection in Stockholm, no country is currently meeting its obligations under the Paris Agreement. And considering that the agreement entered into force a few years ago already, is it even possible to reverse this trend? Mr. Wiech, maybe?
Well, it is possible, but the possibility is lowering actually day by day right now. And we do have now ongoing discussions in the EU to, for example, extend the work of coal-fired power plants just to help us cope with the energy crisis. And this will damage our energy or climate goals and energy policy in the ways that we cannot predict properly right now, because we don't know how the situation on Ukraine will going to develop. But well, I think that we underestimated or maybe overestimated our will and our measures that we have undertaken previously in order to stop global warming. And we have to change the whole economical paradigm to cope with that matter, because we have to put a financial burden on the economies that go on with emissions, and of course on the products of these economies. We have to shift from the fossil fueled world to the world that fossils are going out from our economy. And this is not something that we can do just in 1 year or even in 1 decade, because we have to also remember of the social impact on that kind of policies. Well, I'm wondering if the experiences from the coronavirus pandemics or the ongoing war brought by Russia to Ukraine can learn us something in this field. And well, I'm afraid that the conclusions are quite pessimistic. We are so tied to the current level of living and the current state of our lives that we will not easily go for a new world without emissions, and of course without some services or products that we can have today in our daily lives. So while watching the ongoing discussions and the events from the pandemic or from the war of Russia, well, I'm quite more and more pessimistic in the order if we can go with our current climate targets just by living in the same way as we are living right now.
Mr. Eickhout, do you have something to add before we wrap it up?
No, it's a very good answer, which I fully agree with. So the only thing maybe I can say is when we are talking about the targets, when we set the Paris Agreement, we said we want to stay well below the 2 degrees and preferably below 1.5 degrees global warming. After that, we have seen some further research, which was more and more indicating there is a big difference in impacts and in accepting impacts if you stay below 1.5 or 2 degrees. That's why the debate has shifted a bit, like, should we not try to stay below 1.5? Well, a very recent Nature article is now indicating we have a 50% chance to stay below 1.5, which means already a 50% chance we will not stay below 1.5. And each year, the chances will go in the wrong direction. So on your question, will we be capable of doing it? I agree very much with Jakub. Yes, it can be done, but it's a matter of political will, investments, and a lot of the issues that we discussed. But we see for now that the 1.5 staying below that is getting less and less and less likely. And that will result in impacts that we still have not fully grasped. And that's unfortunately also a message that makes me a bit, pessimistic. Maybe the final points also to relate it still to the war in Ukraine now, because also there I agree very much with Jakub. What you feel now and what you hear people say now, mainly politicians, is kind of the climate targets need to wait because we have other issues. This is a fundamental misinterpretation of the crisis that we are having at hand. You can't say, you wait now for a couple of years and we come back to you. The climate system is changing and is not waiting. And as long as we think we need to handle issues each case by case, we will not get there and we will have a fundamental problem. We need to tackle these issues hand in hand, and that's the only way. Yes, it's difficult. We have to think of short-term decisions. How can that prevent lock-ins? What does it mean for the transition? What does it mean where we need to go to? But if we do not do that, we will have fundamental problems with our climate system. We cannot ask the climate system to wait. It is changing now.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this very informative discussion. I really hope that we all learned something new today. I certainly did. And on a final note, we hope to see everyone on our next events, and please stay in tune with our Facebook and our website to keep up with the next events. Thank you very much again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.